I have a ride, and I don't always have a ride, but I actually have a ride coming up for this
So you go
Sunday.
with someone who is also a socialist, is going over for the party meeting,
There are
or
no other socialists in Bennington. He lives in Wallingford,
okay,
and so he says it's not too much out of his
Oh,
way
right?
down here.
to
Uh-huh.
come down here and go over to Brattleboro that way.
Yeah. Hello?
And then are the meetings during the day or in the evening?
During the
Or...
day.
Okay, I guess we can start up. This is
Oh,
cab
okay.
notes for, what's this, September the 8th,
Yes.
2017. Yes. And we're here to talk about the local efforts to quell national chaos. You said quell wasn't really a very good word, right?
Well, it was an interesting word.
Yeah. But the idea is that we do have a lot of really active people here in Bennington and surrounds who are trying to do something about the chaotic decisions being made in Washington and non-decisions as well. So um, Rosemary Jukowski and Barbara True are two very involved people in trying to get some kind of local action going, get people stirred up, get people motivated, get people on track to address some of these huge problems that we face. Actually, part of this program was inspired by Charlie Rossiter, who was telling us a while back about this Day for Peace. I think it's on September 30th. And people all around the world are going to have these occasions where they have singing and poetry and dramatics all aimed at peace.
Mhm.
And there will be various, at least one big occasion here in town which people should watch for. So, um, why don't we just start with you, Barbara, and you can tell us how you got into the whole idea of trying to address this huge problem, or these huge problems you might say that we have. And
Well, let me first sort of think about what the problems are
yes,
that we see the hurricanes coming and the aftermath of Harvey, and so that's a natural disaster, right?
mm, right,
And there's been this question about um, why are why are we having so many hurricanes and why are they so monstrous? The
yeah,
Irma seems to be like breaking records for
yes,
big nasty storms,
right,
and so I think it's self-evident that this is climate change,
mm-hmm,
and I think we experience that ourselves with Irene, and so we start getting these nudges, these consequences of climate change, and it's kind of easy to ignore them because they come piecemeal, right? So you can say, well, that's Irma, but that doesn't have anything to do with me, and
right,
it's hard for us to imagine that that this thing climate change is actually coming. This summer has been odd, has it not been? I mean, it's been cool
mm-hmm,
and rainy, and the tomatoes don't ripen,
right,
and
right,
that's climate change.
mm-hmm,
And so we know that as the atmosphere warms up, that climate parameters are changing, and part of the issue with global warming is the variability in climate and the intensification of climate.
mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm,
those are the indicators that have been predicted, and that's what we're seeing.
mm-hmm,
So my focus has been to work with the climate group 350 Vermont. 350 Vermont is um, an affiliate with 350.org, which was started by Bill McKibben. And it is not just an environmental group, it is really focused on having addressing the issue of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So 350 is a number that is referred to how many parts per million of carbon dioxide is safe in the environment. And that's 350. We are now at 410.
Wow. Oh.
So the atmospheric chemistry is becoming clear, and these indicators that we get in our lives are clear. And so I've been working at developing a group here in Bennington and Bennington area that is active in raising awareness and educating people, in working with others to address some specific issues, like one of the things 350 is attempting is to reduce the amount of fossil fuel infrastructure that is being built. So that's what the pipeline protests are about, is why are we focusing on developing fossil fuels and shipping them across the country when we know that that's what's bringing us disaster? And so if we don't build pipelines, we can't move the fossil fuel, the petroleum products. So we want to reduce the level of new infrastructure, and we want to help develop renewable sources of energy. And that is coming along beautifully. There's more and more solar being built. There are more jobs in solar than there are in the coal industry. So that's sort of the two-sided approach. So try to stop infrastructure and build up renewables as a way to address the issue of climate.
Great. Okay.
I see Forrest got
Yes,
Hi.
Forrest Berg
Hi.
joined us here. Great. So, Rosemary, your emphasis over the last while has been on your blogs on what?
Everything, war, peace, the environment, which is something that comes up every single day. And I remind people every single day when environmental issues come up that the greatest threat to the environment is the Pentagon. And people tend to not recognize that. I mean, just stop and think about it. Stop and think about how much fuel an F-35 uses in 1 hour, and manufacturing process, and on and on and on and on. There have been PFOA suits against military bases because of the pollution. So if you're really an environmentalist, you have to be opposed not only to war, but to all of the infrastructure that goes along with that. I believe that the military budget should be cut by 99%.
Here, here.
Really.
Yeah.
But there, I like the title of today's program because we have such an extreme amount of chaos going on now. We need, instead of chaos, we need due process. And one of the things that happened recently in Vermont was the event at Middlebury where violence broke out. And that was about 2 or 3 months ago. That really got me thinking, and in case people are not familiar with that, a student organization invited an author named Charles Murray to speak. Another group of students objected to this and wanted him silenced. And so violence broke out. A professor who was one of those who invited him was injured and had to be taken to the hospital. She's okay. But the fact that there is violence breaking out, it seems almost every day on college campuses, is a big issue. And along with this has come the development of this movement that is new in this country, not new in Europe, the Antifa or Antifa movement. I happen to have had contact with some of them. Interesting debate going on, and I basically told them that I object to any violence. Doesn't matter which side, doesn't matter to me. Right. Violence is violence, and I object to it all. But this has been a real learning process for me, because all my life I thought I was nonviolent. And after talking to some of these folks who support violence, I realized that there's a difference between being nonviolent and anti-violent. And I now know what I am. I am anti-violent, not just nonviolent. So anyway, it's really interesting, some of the things that are going on. And I brought some books about the censorship that's going on, and maybe if we have time, we can talk about that.
Yeah, Forrest, I was very interested in your efforts in the community here to, I guess, do community building and the poetry readings things and the mural idea project.
Yeah. Well, it's been a really multifaceted program that I'm trying to develop. With Bennington Murals, I want it to be and Story Night. I've taken just everything that I love about stories and kind of bringing people together, and that's really that's my personal selfish goal, is to just listen to people's stories and start to understand where we're at, but and hearing about all of our differences and how we approach problems is part of where I think the United States as a whole, but also as an individual, we're not content in how we live. And so I kind of I in Vermont, we have a very independent, very free, I think, society where we just kind of like want to be independent. We want to do what we want to do, but we also realize community is very important. So it's kind of like it's tying all the parts together that we care about and starting to understand that we're one family, and recognizing the differences that we all have. The one thing that I notice about stories is that you have you have many different sides, and it doesn't matter where somebody's coming from. They are the hero in their own story, and we are all the heroes in our own story. And when we start to go at somebody else's story, we're only pulling from our own perspective. And so when we start to stop somebody from being who they are or what they are or who or are living and being happy, we end up making sometimes a bigger mess than what we were intending to stop. And so things like stopping something so big like climate change, or something like violence or war, the other side obtusely gets more and more egregious every time you start to attack it. And for some reason we don't allow for that. Peace never comes because we never allow for it to come. We think that by being the louder person, the story escalates into something that's very dramatic and very terrible sometimes. And it would be better if we start to listen and start to come back to that part of our human consciousness, which is the campfire, which Story Night is. We're going to be around the campfire this month. It's going to be so great. We're going to be out open up the parking lot and sit around the fireplace for the theme mystery. But so If you guys have stories, just you should come by and tell one. But it's but that's the heart of what it means to be human. And I think that this national discussion is confusing us. We're turning chaos as a vehicle for promoting more chaos instead of actually realizing that we're content. You know, we're enough. Everything is okay. We just aren't realizing that because it's so stressful. I mean, it is very stressful. Like everything that you're saying is right. Everything, you know, all that is about to happen, but tomorrow's not promised for any of us. We are here to live our life and be happy, and so that's where the story comes in. And Bennington Murals is about painting huge murals and stories from our life and our experiences, surprises that basically create walls that inspire us as a town, and it's a evolving kind of a story, a narrative that doesn't necessarily have to be a static picture. It's about saying, you know, this movement is really important to me. This image is very important to me. This person is very important to me. Let's paint them on the wall. Let's all our businesses come together and sponsor this, and we will and we'll actually pay an artist to do it instead of have it to be volunteer, but actually celebrate art and celebrate our who we are as a community in that, because art is really where we can challenge all these negative forces that are coming at us, and art and language in our stories, in our paintings, in our movements, and everything. So,
I was fortunate enough to see some of the artwork at the mural project in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Oh yeah.
Where apparently they would go into a community and they would talk to the people, and they'd find out, like say, who was maybe their hero or somebody who inspired them or some kind of activity that really touched them, and that's what they would paint on the wall. So these people would then be reinforced in their positive feelings and thinkings every time they saw that.
Every year for years, you're forced to see that inspirational image. Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
You can't forget by seeing it.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to bring up today is the difference between the national and the local, and I think that's one of the things that you inspire Forrest is to not pay attention to the chaos, because that's at a different level, and that if you're not going to pay attention to that, pay attention to your own self. And the way I think of it, because I often think of societal structures and institutions think in that form, is the difference between the national government and state and local governments, because it's really at the local level that has more impact on our lives, is more important to the way we live together. And, you know, when you turn on the tap for water, that's government. You know, when you get in your car and drive that path that you're driving on, that's government. And it's local government. So when you think about your relationship to the national government, we have 320, I think, million people in the country. Let's say half of them are voting. So roughly 150 million people are voting, are eligible to vote. About half of those actually do vote. So 75 million. You're one of 75 million people nationally. But in Bennington, you're one of, say, roughly 8,000.
Right.
So your voice is much stronger at the local level. And we all know that it's much easier to talk to the select board than it is to talk to our senators, although our senators are very accessible. And certainly easier than talking to the president, right? So I really like the idea of focusing at the local level. And even with my concern about the environment, about climate and the atmosphere, the atmosphere is like huge, right? But we have to think global and act local, right? So we have to take those actions at the local level that make a difference to our quality of life now. That is also in keeping with helping climate change, relieving climate change. So things like walking instead, or riding your bike instead of driving your car. You know, just simple things like that that we can each and every one of us do.
Yeah.
Well, like you were saying, how direct action with Martin Luther King being our strength is a lot stronger than we think it is. Like when Martin Luther King realized that there was $1 billion or $2 billion market just for African Americans, and their buying power. The amount that we actually spend money on and things like that, it makes a big difference when we start realizing our own power and where we spend our money, where we do our things, really does make a difference. So it's locally is the most important thing, because you see a direct action.
Right.
If I know everybody at the select board, I know everybody in the local government, it's great to be able to go talk to them and to say, hey.
And I think the creative part of that is really important as well, because when I talk to people in other places that are also activists and think about the programs, the ideas that they come up with, it's like, it's so creative. It's just really cool that you have people that are thinking as activists, but also are thinking creatively. And so that's part of why I think we have to incorporate art into activism.
Another thing that inspired this particular topic was that Andy Shirky, who I thought would be here today, was really encouraging very strongly people at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship the other couple weeks ago about getting out there and doing something. We talk about these challenges, we talk about these opportunities, but you have to actually connect with some action, some doing to. So these signs. Andy's usually down on the Four Corners the first Saturday of every month with his sign, and I get down there most of the time myself and wonder, well, the whole Bennington Peace and Justice Group is invited to this. There must be 35 or 40 people there, and only a few people show up. Just making that step from the thinking about it into the action seems to be difficult for a lot of people, and I don't know whether we feel any responsibility to try to get more people out to tell their stories, or you've inspired a lot of people just to get out there and share, right?
It's been kind of a miracle in that, because I don't really know how that happens directly. Getting people excited, getting people on a pattern of doing things on a regular basis, and being committed to an action that is not necessarily that's contrary to their normal everyday life is a hard thing to do. So like, I was so involved in Bernie's campaign. I did as much as I possibly could. But what I notice is that my overall activities is overwhelming me as far as and I really have to focus in order to do it well. But I really support what is going on. Anytime I see people at Four Corners, I truly appreciate you guys standing there with beautiful posters and reminding us of where we live and what we're doing. But for some reason, I don't have enough hours in the day, and I would love to be able to do that. I want to participate in the enjoyable activities. I want to participate in but I want to also make sure that my motion and my participation is in the positive reinforcement of future activities. So basically, when we have Bennington is a lively town, something that we're always speaking out, we're always doing things. It's not just a specific group. It's all of us, going to progressive shows, going to being part of great restaurants, being part of good community where we just kind of like participate together. And it's not necessarily about oppression. It's about overcoming oppression. And that's it's hard to stand up to it when you're the victim of something at the end of the row. It's better to be the forefront and to say, you know what, we're done with this. Let's just be happy. Let's learn to be this way and do this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, in
It
keeping with this and in keeping with your kind of discouragement at the four corners, it reminds me of an incident in my life. If you remember the shock and awe bombing campaign when we were killing all the kids in Iraq, one night I was very discouraged and my phone rang. It was a phone call from a dear friend of mine, Peter Diamondstone, who was buried on Saturday. And he said something to me which probably you all have heard before, but I had never heard it before. He said, Rosemary, we do not protest to change others. We protest so that others do not change us. And that has stayed with me because it doesn't mean you have failed if you haven't changed the world. You're not a failure. But if you have kept the world from changing you and your heart and your spirit and your soul, then that's a problem. And so, you know, I think we just have to keep on doing what we're doing and don't blame ourselves for what the rest of the world is or isn't doing.
When you think of all of the big movements that have been important to us, it's been not a straightforward thing. And so the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the abolitionist movement were people who, like you're saying, they meet in a house and they talk about it and they do some stuff and then it fades away. But that builds a foundation for doing the next big thing, and that builds a foundation for doing the next thing. And so the history is that you know, a pebble in the pond will spread rings and encompass more and more and more space. And that's the way social movements operate. So you going to working hard for Bernie is part of people all over the country, little bits and pieces working for Bernie, which what happened added up into a real movement for Bernie, and look where he is now. And so, you know, we have to think about, I think of myself as sort of a drop of water in the cup, you know, and if I didn't put my drop in and you didn't put your drop in, then you didn't put your drop, then there wouldn't be any water, but we all have to. And it's sort of what you're saying about the vibrancy of Bennington, that, and I don't know, this might open up another whole chain of thinking, but I've always believed since Trump was elected that the reason he was elected is because the country has lost its vibrant civic culture, and that is exactly what you were talking about people going to good restaurants and people being on the street corners and people chatting with their neighbors and going to community events, and all of that is our civic life, and it's just been eroded and eroded and eroded and eroded until we'd all just rather go home and watch TV. Right?
And that's not even that great. There's
No,
hardly anything
exactly,
on TV, but people
exactly.
still watch it. I don't understand it.
And so if we can rebuild our civic culture where we're all striving to make the city better, regardless of whether or not we're drawing murals or writing blogs or doing TV shows, we're all working together to try to make our communities better. That's civic life, and we need a more vibrant civic life to resist people like Donald Trump.
And there was something keeps coming to mind. I've been noticing, like, there's little skirmishes happening downtown and things like that. And when we when we're in the moment and we have a chance to stand up for something, and we be and to be strong in our conviction, it means to be strong in our conviction, not just for ourselves, but being able to stand in the way of somebody else, you know, of a starting to voice an opinion that's reasonable in the midst of chaos. It's like if two people are punching each other in the middle in front of stewards, say, or something like that, then immediately we divide that, but we don't necessarily turn it into a he said, she said, you know, the law thing. It turns into something that we recognize these people are upset about something, but nobody knows how to handle it. Nobody's communicating with each other. Nobody's listening to each other. So you separate it, but you stand up for your convictions in a way that adheres to our beliefs, and that's something we don't. We're more attached to the emotional connection to it instead of the what it is that we're practicing every single time that we stand up for, or we're talking about the big picture. But now is our time to apply it, you know.
But
Why?
how can you prevent another incident like what happened at Middlebury? What would prevent that?
Well, the prevention happens in the long term. That's the prevention is not about. It's an awareness of the eroding that we're talking about that is constantly going away because we just don't look at it. And then when it happens, it's an immediate crisis. But if we recognize that we are untraining ourselves, like I don't remember anybody's phone numbers anymore. It's like I have decided not to remember any phone numbers. So my dedication needs to sharpen my mind and start to remember the things that are important to me, and actually come back to what I did in the 90s, which was actually catalog it all in my brain. I have to start owning this responsibility that I have for myself, instead of putting it on other people and owning and just reacting to my emotions, which is really anytime I hear a white nationalist speak, my emotions immediately kick in. Or if anybody that is angry, just inherently angry, I just react in such a strong way right away, and then I have to take a second step and be able to do that. You have to be able to know and acknowledge what's missing before you know how to attack it. Otherwise.
So what do you think happened?
Does that make sense?
What do you
And
think
I
happened
think
at
one of the
Middlebury?
things that's happening is kind of an erosion of the belief in the First Amendment and free speech. You know, what's happening? How come? And it's people on the left. Sorry, you know, I don't mean to offend anyone, but one thing that I do agree with that President Trump said was, when he said that there was violence on both sides. That's true. There was violence on both sides in many of these things that have been happening. And I think that there has to be a firm line. All violence should be prosecuted, period, no matter who does it. Start with the law and the institutions that we have. And from early on, I mean, I think that we should be teaching people that freedom of speech is really basic. And if we lose it, we're going to have really, really, really big problems. And I'm not going to take up a lot of time, but there is an awful lot of censorship going on. I heard the author of this book on C.A.B.B, so there is a little bit of good TV. And anyway, I went to the Bennington bookshop and bought it, and I want to show, talking about censorship, I don't know if the camera can get any of that.
Wow.
You know, this is censorship.
All those black lines have been.
Yeah, you know, it's censorship because the government doesn't want us to read what's in the Guantanamo diary, things that are happening at Guantanamo. Freedom of speech, and by looking at violence in another way and coming to the conclusion that it's always wrong, and there are many reasons why it's always wrong, but maybe one of the most fundamental is violence is always used by the powerful over the disenfranchised. I don't care if it's on a schoolyard, it's always the big kid that beats up the little kid. I spent a lot of time on high school playgrounds. And looking at it from a national viewpoint, the country with the biggest bombs is the one that pushes other countries around. So for that moral reason alone, all violence should be condemned.
So going back to the Middlebury example, what do you think actually happened there?
I think
I mean, I know the two
group of
groups were,
students invited, this was students who invited Charles Murray, who's controversial. He was invited to discuss his new book, which was about business and economics, which I don't think is that controversial. But because of previous books he has written years ago, some students objected, which is fine. You know, everybody has the right to their opinion. But then they got violent, and it's
why
the
do
violence.
you think they got violent?
Because they wanted to silence him. And I think instead of trying to silence him, they would have made their point much better if they had simply debated him, and they could have. But they wanted to silence him, and it's been happening on other college campuses, also Berkeley and so forth. Another very controversial issue now is the destruction of monuments and statues in the South, and I understand why people consider them to be offensive. You know, every war memorial offends me, but I don't think I have the right to deface it. And so one of the things I've blogged recently is that private property, no one has the right to destroy someone else's property, and those statues and monuments were not owned by the people who destroyed them. You know, there's a better way to go about it. Go to your town board, have them take the offensive statues, put them in a museum, melt them down, do whatever. But just violent destruction of other people's property, think about it. What organization did that? The KKK, when they burned down houses. So,
well, the terrorization of one person versus like a terrorization of an entire community, which is basically what a monument does. It symbolizes it tells everybody that this is what we stand for in the middle of an entire square, and it basically says that we are for this, and then it forces everybody, whether they agree with it or not, to tell that story to their kids, to basically make or just pass by it, whatever. But the idea of bureaucracy trying to solve the problem is not always the easiest thing. When you go to a government and try to say, hey, you know, I really don't like this, that never happens. And you know, you can't, like you said, you're 1 in 74 million, so you know, it's like there's no, it's important that we stand up for what needs to change. Philadelphia's monument lab is transforming all of their monuments downtown, and they're actually doing a incredibly inspiring project. Everybody's looking at monuments in a different way, and it's so great. You should check out their website. It's really neat to see. And you know, but to be thoughtful about how you do it, raise the right grants, be able to actually, you know, be a presence is really important. And you're right, being obtusely aggressive in a negative way doesn't seem to stimulate positive activity. That it only creates another side that creates more negativity. So yes, you're very right. The violence is bad. You know, that violence is wrong. But the thing is sometimes, and standing up for your beliefs does not. It may seem, you have to be strong in it, and but
I
you also have to
absolutely
be
agree.
open in it too, and there's two different kinds of things happening at the same time, and sometimes at the select board, one person or two people only have the floor the entire night, and
I know.
so and we don't ever realize that what they're saying is shutting down any kind of real movement in the entire board. So it's good that we actually start to realize that we give people the opportunity to make change. We have to make change.
One of the important things, and I like our select board. I know that they perform a real important public service, but their 15-minute rule really stifles communication within the community. 15 minutes per the town. And I never calculated it out. I think comes to like 4 seconds per citizen. That
If everybody showed up.
well, people don't, well, that's the point. People don't anymore because the town conversation has been chilled by things like that. People don't feel welcome. And the few people who do show up, sometimes they're treated with respect, and sometimes they're kind of hustled off. And I understand that there's an attempt to keep the select board meetings limited in time. I understand that. But what's the answer? I don't think the answer is limiting the entire town to 15 minutes twice a month.
Is there any other space where where townspeople can meet to talk about their
I
concerns?
wish there was. I've pushed for that for a long time. It just wouldn't seem to work. There's something more official about a select board or town meeting. I mean, if Joe Blow says meet at my house or the coffee shop every Tuesday at whatever 3 o'clock, who's going to show up? It's really hard to organize people, as I'm sure you all know.
believe me.
You all know.
Well,
But it seems to me like that speaks to my point about a civic life is
Right.
People used to go to PTAs and Rotaries and churches and all these other social groups, and they don't anymore. So
and those had a lot of power because the mothers would come together, or parents would come together, or the groups would all enjoy not only each other's company, but then they would figure out what
They would
the
talk to each
community
other
is
about
doing.
what-
It's
yeah.
like, and then they would have a group that could actually say, "Hey, we have an issue with this, or
Yeah.
we have something going on.
we want a
So
stoplight out there by that school.
that would be nice to me. I don't know.
I want Howard Zinn's books in all the schools. Can you do that?
Well, we can talk about it. That's what I'm saying is we need places where we can talk about
Absolutely, I
any
agree.
idea, every idea.
And you have to kind of shrink it down. You can't do it all in one meeting.
No.
I've never felt stifled at the select board, except for when an issue like Apple Hill comes up or something like that, where we are not. There's an aggressive opposite side, and there's not very many other people that either don't care, or there's not a lot of balance in the conversation.
People are afraid. Bennington is a very small town, and people are afraid of repercussions. Really, I wish that you would speak up more. Speak up now. Give your position on Apple Hill. I think both sides, sometimes 3 and 4 sides, should always be heard.
Well, I did at the select board, and the specific projects. I mean, I think that Apple Hill, the changes that they made on the proposal actually was very thoughtful to what was asked for. I think the way that they approached the whole situation, and they didn't accommodate or go to the specific people and work with them as well as they should have. The problem is that wall was built, and that created the problem. But when I see a 5-year plan of no ice in the North Pole, in summertime. 5 to 8 years is what we're talking about, and the ocean level rising 20 meters in the next few years. Why aren't we just open to having solar panels around us instead of oil plants? Why aren't we scrapping the entire oil industry altogether and moving in a very aggressive way in a new direction so that we can do really thoughtful things? And the interesting thing is they're saying, well, let's look at other projects. Every project takes years to develop, and we cannot wait that long. And the thing is we're Vermont. We're the entrance of New York into Vermont. We want to show people that we not only care about the green, but we care about everything green. We care about being completely sustainable. 100% by 2025
Thank
is
you.
a hard thing to
Thank you,
do.
Forrest. I agree completely.
But why we would spend all of our time arguing, it doesn't make any sense. So,
Years ago at a socialist meeting, someone suggested that every house in Vermont should have a little windmill in their backyard. And I'll tell you, that's not such a bad idea, because sooner or later, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, the smart grid is going to go down. And if it goes down during the winter time, Vermonters will die. And people need to really think about that. And I hate to get back to the subject of books again, but I really wish everyone would read Ted Koppel's Lights Out. Because there are many reasons why the grid might go down, and not all of them are terrorism. My tech guy, who's really smart, one of the smartest guys in Bennington, says that the grid might probably go down because of an EMP. And if it's down, and if there is damage to the equipment, the generators and so forth, it may take many months for replacement parts. So, and talking about things being local and so forth, emergency management is not at all prepared for this. There are no real preparations. Many years ago, I suggested that somewhere in Bennington there be a bank of generators that people could borrow or rent in case of a disaster. That's never happened. But if it's a long problem, generators won't help, because there'll be no gasoline, there'll be no nothing. So maybe we all need solar panels and small windmills.
Well, even solar and renewables are not the complete answer. We need to start thinking 25 years ahead. We need to start planning a new energy infrastructure. We really need to start realizing that we're in unknown territory right now, and for the last 60 years we have not been developing our solar panels in the aggressive way that we have. We haven't been thinking about batteries. We haven't been thinking about what it means to have energy. We've just been using the heck out of it, and we don't we are not. This is the critical point right now, that a lot of people are going to struggle because of it.
And may I say, the thing that we really can do right away and should do is weatherizing houses.
Yeah.
That would save so much fuel and money, and it's low-hanging fruit. We don't have to invent batteries. We don't have to invent. We've already got it. We've invented insulation and weather stripping, and we should have a 5-year plan to weatherize.
There's no talk anymore about passive solar. In 1985,
I know that's the most
I
easiest
put
way
all
to build
I
the
put
other
all
day.
of my windows on the south side in 1985, and people would drive by and say, "Wow, you must be nuts," you know. I received a lot of criticism. That was 1985. Boy, am I glad I did what I did.
Yeah.
Really, you know.
Yeah, simple is the best, and making sure that
It doesn't
you do
cost one penny.
Make some good radiant. It's just a thermal mass in your floor, and you're all.
I
set
don't
to
even
go.
have that. I just have all windows, logical, on the south side. And it really does make a difference, because I keep my thermostat at 55.
And then in the summer, what do you do?
No problem. There are leaves on the trees.
Ah, okay.
I was reading books. You keep going back to books, but I got a wealth of books. I'm building a new wood shop, and I'm seeing all the wealth of information that everybody has been building over the years, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have to just come back to a simpler way of thinking that doesn't necessarily require technology to solve the problem. We have to use technology in a simple way, but we have to start developing those habits, which is remembering phone numbers and understanding that a cell phone is not the end all thing for our life. Everything is, we have to just reach our hands in and do it, whether it's building our own garden, taking care of ourselves. And it's really just taking care of ourselves. It's not always about the group. It's about individuals actually seeing the problems and the good things in their life and starting to build with that. And if they need help, ask your neighbor. And that's where we have to start. We have to really come back to that simple. It's
Thinking about cell phones reminds me of the book back in the 50s written by Vance Packard about planned obsolescence.
Mm-hmm.
Why do people, I don't own a cell phone, so why do people have to keep replacing their cell phones every few years, every time there's some new one that comes out? Think of all the waste. Think of the environmental damage there.
Yeah.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they have the piles of cell phones in different countries that they actually take apart for the natural resources.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't own an Apple, you know, and 20% of those, and there's like 2 billion of those things out there. So, you know, you have, it's mountains of phones. So, and that's just phones.
Yeah.
That's just the phone part. So, you know, think about the computers and everything else. So
I think one answer is to try to improve or upgrade or preserve and protect landlines. I think someday if we get rid of all the landlines, people are going to be very sorry that they did. And I know they're not dependable now. I've had many problems with Fairpoint, but I went 6 months with no dependable service, which is a challenge if you're 80 years old, you know, and no close neighbors around and no cell phone.
Well, there's a whole conversation we could have about the reliability and the wonderful company we know as Fairpoint. It's a contradiction in name, actually. But
And part of the problem is the Public Service Board, Public Utilities Commission, that gave companies such as Fairpoint the right to bill for service for 24 hours, even if they provided service for only 1 minute. It's called Public Service Board Rule 7.609, I think. And, you know, how many people know about that? And why isn't something done about that? And is there any incentive for companies to improve when they have this captive audience that's going to have to pay anyway?
Well, you could always go to Comcast.
Oh.
No, I'm totally kidding. But I think what we're saying is perhaps a simpler, more local life is beneficial, and not only beneficial but inspiring, and actually leads to a better life. So simplify. I would say recycle, reuse, reduce, and you know, it's not just cell phones that we're talking about. It's new computers, it's new cars,
Everything.
it's the second home, it's the vacation in the Bahamas. It's, you know, we actually lead a very luxurious life. The
problem is
States.
Not everyone does. Well, bringing up
Well,
second homes,
I
so you need to become a socialist, because we would confiscate all second homes and give them to the homeless.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is that okay, so people turn their water on to wash dishes or rinse dishes and then put them in the dishwasher, but you turn the water on full blast. I've seen people do this, and then leave it on as you're doing other things. Why? Right? I mean, that's a luxurious use of water, which is becoming a precious commodity, and that globally we're running out of, and we use it as without thinking. You know, it's just throwaway. We're not using it. We're just throwing it away, and we need to rethink those habits and structures, and just lead a calmer, safer, uh, better, saner, can I say, life. That that luxury isn't an indicator of the good.
Yeah, I often thought that you know, the Chamber of Commerce, you know, has these big events like Mayfest or the
Right.
Garlic Fest or any kind of big event to bring people into the
Right.
community. No, let's have lots of tourists. And shouldn't there be a much stronger voice from that quarter on trying to create a community, well, like you're trying to create, you know, where you have storytelling and you have people interacting with each other, rather than putting all their efforts into trying to attract tourists here to buy stuff.
Right,
No.
right. Well, you want to have attractive things for people to go see, and that's why story night's fun, you know, or why things like that, like having specific things that mark your town. But yeah, you want to really make, you want to live your town. You don't want to
Yeah.
be a
Yeah, sell it to somebody else.
yeah. It's not a commodity. This is it's an organic living thing that is comprised of individuals that make things that they want to make, and they are part of the community the way they want to be part of, and people are attracted to that, and that's a solid product. That is something that when I go to Boston, the places in Boston that I go to are the communities that have worked around that kind of spirit, and they create what I want to go see. Or Philadelphia is the same thing, you
Yeah,
know,
that-
and that is all about community. They badger the community to find out if they're going to be opposed to this wall or not. Every time that they're going to have to see it, if they haven't talked to somebody in different houses, they make sure that they annoy the heck out of them before they get that mural up, because they don't want to have any opposition. They want to have people that are involved. They want to have activities that are part of it. They have homeless walls that they work specifically with the homeless community, and it's just like, and they oh man, it's incredible what they do.
Yeah.
And that all started in the 80s when they just started thinking about art a little bit differently.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think our hour is about up. Do you have another comment you want to make quickly?
So, what about the chaos at the national level? That's where we started.
Oh, well, we're just ignoring that.
No, I just want to comment that I think that the way we think about the local level and our communities and what we want from our communities and what we're prepared to do for our communities is a whole different thing than what's happening at the national level. And the national level gets so much news focus that we start thinking that that's everything, and it isn't, and it shouldn't be. And we can, I pay attention, a lot of attention to the national news, but it's not the thing that most affects our day-to-day lives.
Yes.
unless we let it. And the thing about narcissists, and the thing about people that crave attention, and people that only are used to that kind of addictive nature, feed off of our attention. And so if we give our attention to it, and we consume our valuable hours to that thing, then that's will only build that, and it only validates what they do. If we turn our back to it and say this is not what we're interested in as a community, if we start to say what we actually stand for as a state, I mean, Vermont needs to isolate its. I understand its strength in our simple little state, you know, and it's and break from the pattern of all of that, you know, then we won't be absorbed by it, and Donald Trump will have no voice. His voice should be the people, and the people is not a right wing alt-right, nationalist, I'm going to burn your house down feeling.
I do want to, if Andy were here, he would point out that the North Korean issue is a very important event that's happening, and that Donald Trump does make a huge difference with respect to national defense and international crises of all sorts. And I don't want to negate that when I say the local level is important.
Yes. Well, thank you all very much for being part of the panel.
One more thing to say.
Okay.
Just one more quickie.
Yeah, yeah.
I think everyone should support the First Amendment, especially when you don't agree with the person. Yeah, I mean, if you agree with the person, then, you know, it's no big deal. But it's when we disagree with what they say that we should honor their right to say it anyway.
Mhm. Very good. Okay.
Oh,
Thank you all.
Story night, September 19th. Tap House.
Be there.
Or Two Brews, sorry.
Okay.